Well, hello everyone. Thanks for joining us today for today's event. My name is Amanda and I'm a bookseller here at Powell's City of Books. Before we begin, I wanted to encourage you to check out our lineup of upcoming virtual events by visiting our website at powells.com. In the coming weeks, we're looking forward to welcoming Lydia Yuknavitch with Vanessa Veselka, Kim Kelly on June 29th, among others. Please remember to follow us on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. And if you haven't already done so, you may sign up for our weekly event emails at powells.com. Tonight, we're honored to welcome Kaitlyn Tiffany and Lindsay Zoladz, I'm so sorry. In her new book, Everything I Need I Get From You, Kaitlyn Tiffany, a staff writer at The Atlantic and superfan herself, guides us through the online world of fans, stands, and boy bands. Along the way, we meet girls who damage their lungs from screaming too loud, fans rallying together to manipulate chart numbers using complex digital subversion, and an underworld of inside jokes and shared memories surrounding band members' allergies, internet typos, and hairstyles. In the process, Tiffany makes a convincing and often moving argument that fangirls, in their ingenuity and collaboration, created the social internet we know today, effectively making One Direction the first internet boy band. With humor, empathy, and an expert's eye, Everything I Need I Get From You reclaims internet history for young women, establishing fandom not as the territory of hysterical girls, but as an incubator for digital innovation, art, and community. From alarming fandom-splitting conspiracy theories about secret love and fake children to the interplays between high and low culture and capitalism, Tiffany's book is a riotous chronicle of the movement that changed the internet forever. Tiffany will be joined in conversation by music critic, reporter, and essayist Lindsay Zoladz. Zoladz is a frequent contributor to the New York Times, and her writing has appeared in publications such as New York, Pitchfork, The Ringer, Book Forum, and more. This evening's event will also include a Q&A. Please use the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen if you'd like to ask a question. And if someone has typed a question that you'd also like to know the answer to, please consider upvoting that question. And perhaps most importantly, please consider supporting Kaitlyn Tiffany and Powell's by purchasing a copy of Everything I Need I Get From You. A link to buy the book will be shared in the chat this evening. And without any further ado, please welcome the one and only Kaitlyn Tiffany and Lindsay Zoladz.
Hi, Caitlin.
Hi. What's up? How are you?
And hello, everyone out there. I'm so excited to talk to you about this book. And we first talked to each other, I guess, about a month ago now on an episode of the New York Times podcast. And it was prior to the book coming out, I believe. Mm-hmm. And the first thing I wanted to know was just, because I think when I was reading this book, I, as a music critic, certainly have a relationship to stan culture now, which is something I'm having to deal with on social media and on the internet. Stan armies just, trying to bully me into reviewing their faves album and such. So I know the power of the stan army. And I just wanted to know, like, how has it been for you now that this book is out? Like, have the directioners come to get you? Have they embraced you? How has it been? Are you okay?
Yeah. It's funny. Actually, I think I got like more sort of like angry tweets about my comments on the New York Times podcast than I have so far about the book. I don't know. It's hard to say. I am of the sort where like I don't have Twitter notifications on for anybody that I don't follow. So sometimes people will text me and be like, "Oh my God, you made Glenn Greenwald mad. What are your mentions like?" I'm like, "Oh, I had no idea." So it's possible that the stands have come for me. I know there's definitely like pockets of Tumblr that are like on one side or the other of like, should this book even exist? And like, yeah, if I name search there's a whole like potpourri of opinions.
But I don't endorse anyone searching their own name on any social media site.
Yeah, I know.
With that. But I guess going off that, like, you write a little bit about in the book, like the sort of trepidation of there's a lot of tension in these cultures, and there is a certain resistance, as in any subculture, to being written about by, you know, a seeming outsider, even though you yourself identify as a directioner, or at least did at parts of what you're writing about in this book. But I'm curious how you sort of navigated that balance of, because you do talk to quite a few stans and One Direction fans in the book. Was it difficult to sort of get their trust? Did they treat you like an outsider, or did you find the community kind of easy to infiltrate, as it were?
It sort of depends. I guess like a lot of the interviews in the book came from, I put out like a Google form on my Twitter asking for interviews, and of like 300-ish responses, probably like 10 of them were prank responses that were like, leave us alone, go get a job or whatever. And so those people had opted into being interviewed, and they were really excited to talk about fandom. I think like there's maybe a little bit of a generational difference between Twitter stans that are maybe more open to that kind of attention versus like Tumblr fandom feels a lot more private to a lot of people. So when there were particular Tumblr users that I thought were important to talk to, it was definitely more of a process to like explain to them what the book was about and how I was going to use their interviews and all of that. And yeah, that's where I think a lot of the resistance came from too, like people who are like really immersed in like thinking about like power and media and the entertainment industry as it relates to this band that they care about, but it's like maybe gotten to the point of being like slightly paranoid. Like there was a lot of claims that I was like lying to people, gonna write a hit piece, like just here to like make a bunch of money. And I was like, let me show you like a typical book contract. But so yeah, I think it varied a lot. And definitely I think there was like an age divide where younger fans were more interested in talking than older fans, especially older fans who were involved in some of the things that One Direction fandom became notorious for.
Yeah. So for people who haven't read the book yet too, like could you do sort of weave in your own personal history with One Direction, which is a little bit, I guess, non-traditional from, I mean, there's no traditional form of standing, I guess, but if you could just like walk us through a little bit how you first came to fall in love with 1D.
Yeah. I guess I was sort of like a late bloomer compared to the like typical stereotype because I was I guess 19. I was going to school, going to college, and like I just truly hated it. I hated everything about it. I just was like not making friends, or like the friends that I did have, I was like, I don't actually like you. And so One Direction, I think, kind of came into that, like made sense for me in that moment because it was a way of like bonding with my younger sisters who were into One Direction, and I was feeling kind of some anxiety about like not being at home anymore. I'm the oldest, so everybody else was still at home and I was having like FOMO. And I think it was exciting. It was my first internet subculture, so it was really exciting in that way. I hadn't really been part of anything like that before. And I guess like it like gave me something to talk about that wasn't just like when I would talk to my sisters, or I would talk to a couple of my friends from high school that were into One Direction too. It was something that we could discuss rather than me just being like, I'm miserable, I'm having an awful time, and talking about that all the time. And I think like that experience, like not that specific experience, but a lot of fans I talked to would bring up like finding fandom like at these sort of like crisis points or like transition points in their life, and like it makes sense that teenagers would be really into it because that's a pretty big transition phase for almost everyone. But then I think like a lot of a lot of people also have those experiences later in life where they have that kind of like whoosh of like fandom coming out of the clear blue sky. It's just like not talked about as much.
Yeah, and I mean, I think this is something I want to go back to a lot, but a point that you make in the book, because I think something I really appreciated about the book is that it's both really granular in sort of the One Direction subculture, but it's also about fandom and standing as a larger cultural force that I think is incredibly far reaching now. And I really liked, I think it was in the final chapter, you sort of make this point that like everything is fan culture now. Politics is been infiltrated by fan culture and stan culture, brands on the internet, and there's something about that feels like a little nefarious at the moment too. Of we stan everybody now, and if maybe you could talk a little bit about how this book and sort of what you're writing about feels about something larger than just One Direction. No offense to One Direction. Of course, but I think there's a broader implication that since reading this book, I've started seeing it everywhere.
Yeah, I at the end I was sort of talking about just fandom as sort of the dominant mode of like speech on the internet, or of like engagement with news and current events. Like we saw this a ton with the Russian invasion of Ukraine, just how quickly President Zelensky became the subject of fandom and not just that people like liked him or thought he was a good guy, but just the way that they expressed that was like so like visually beholden to fandom. Just like the way that people talked about him and like situated him in these kind of like moral narrative arcs, I thought was really informed by fandom. And yeah, I think like it's become the way that people react to things or present themselves on the internet. It's like your entire identity is made up of which things you like and which things you don't like. And pretty much your task is to just like be on the internet all day, like expressing as many of those things as you can so that you have the most like coherent and interesting personal brand possible. So yeah, I think like part of what seems kind of nefarious about it is like politically, it's obviously not a very like rational way of engaging, but also just, I don't know, there's something so like manipulative and insidious about making like marketing so deeply entwined with like love. I just and you can see like fans kind of like twisting and like contorting to get away from that, and like using more and more obscure language to describe themselves, or coming up with weirder and weirder memes that are more and more difficult for people outside of fandom to understand. And I really think that's like a reaction to seeing their own language like sold back to them by like the Ticketmaster social media manager or whatever.
Totally. And I think sold is the operative word there too. Something that's kind of a thread throughout the book that I appreciated too is how, I think there's this common misconception that, the fangirl or the stan is just someone who's there to be marketed to in a really like one-dimensional way and spend all of their disposable income on things that are, just materialistic and marketed to them. And I think you teased out the ways in which particularly the directioners and that community, but a lot of stan communities and fan communities push back against that idea of being marketed to. And there is something sort of anti-capitalist about a lot of it that you trace. And so again, to kind of see the way that brands, there was that old Twitter account now, Brands Saying Bay, that like a harbinger of this, that the way that brands will, I feel like the Netflix Twitter accounts are ones that are notorious for using kind of like fan culture language about their own content. It's like,
Yeah.
oh, we fan, you know, this character from Stranger Things, and it's like, you're being paid to do this. Like, is it therefore not standing? So yeah, like that feels, it's interesting, like how you're trying to, as a fan in these communities, it seems like now that a lot of this has gone mainstream, it's them trying to find, like you said, the language that this can't really be commodified or marketed to or understood by outsiders, I guess.
Yeah, totally. I mean, like, no matter what happens, like, Target cannot tweet like Harry Styles spit in my mouth or whatever. So like
Yeah.
there are things that you can like keep out of reach of the brands, thankfully.
Yeah, I wonder too, like on that note, I think, you know, I think the book, and something you do really well in the book, is like capturing the creative spirit and sometimes the really absurdist and surrealist spirit of these fan cultures, and how, again, sort of not it, they're making content that cannot be reappropriated by, say, Target or something like that. What do you think the role of just strangeness and absurdity plays, particularly in the One Direction fan community?
Yeah. I don't like I it's hard to say how like conscious or deliberate some of it is in terms of like I think looking at the really weird memes on Tumblr where it's like this is you know, this is what you would have this Shrek branded kid cuisine for dinner with Niall before you like fell off a cliff together or whatever. Like those like super weird things that just like don't even make sense. I don't know how much of it is deliberately avoiding marketing and how much of it is just like it's such a huge fandom. There's so many people talking about these boys all the time. Like you have to kind of push into stranger and stranger scenarios and territory in order to like think of something new to say. And I think like the whole just like aesthetic of Tumblr like encourages these kinds of things. It sort of like has kind of like an alt lit vibe. It's just like what's
Yeah.
the weirdest like digital nightmare that we can imagine that involves these like boys that we love. But yeah, those are my favorite things. The super scary, weird, short fanfic. That's just like some of them are like notorious in the fandom and you'll still see like TikToks making fun of them like 8 years
Yeah,
later or whatever.
Did you explain the, or not explain because it does, but like the Nile crawling in someone's ear? Was that a thing?
Yeah. When I worked at The Verge in 2015, I like stumbled across this Tumblr called Bad 1D Imagines, which is kind of what I was just talking about. It's like this woman was just like collecting and curating like a blog of really weird One Direction like micro fiction, and one of them was just like it's just like a picture of Niall Horan and then there's this like chunky black text over his face that's just like imagine Niall Horan crawling into your ear, you tell him to stop but he is in there. And I'm just like
have it memorized word for word. It's like
yeah,
a short poem or something.
it's been blazed in my brain for the last like 7 years now. But yeah, then my sister sent me a TikTok when I was working on the book that was like a girl like, you know, flipping the script and she had a picture of Niall and then like a little picture of herself and was like navigating it into his ear and being like yeah, yes, he was like, yes sir, I'm in there, whatever. It was like, it was very funny to me and like also kind of startling. I was just like, I didn't know that there would be somebody on the internet that would still be thinking about that post.
Yeah. How aware are, you know, I think that it varies from, you know, celebrity to celebrity or band to band. But like, how aware are the former members of One Direction of these stan communities? And it seems like it varies from person to person in that,
Yeah.
among those five, but do they interact? Like, is there, or is it kind of keeping them at an arm's length?
I feel like they were super aware like during the One Direction days. And they engaged a lot, particularly on Twitter. Weirdly, Zayn like made a Tumblr right after he left One Direction, but I feel like he never used it for anything. When he did that, I was like, oh, this is gonna be interesting, but no. I mean, that's the story of Zayn in a nutshell, I guess. This is gonna be interesting. No. I think like I don't honestly really follow Liam very much anymore, but I think Louis and Niall are still pretty engaged with like responding to tweets and stuff. Whereas Harry, I think, is kind of like less is more approach. He's like a little bit more aloof. I guess they definitely went through a phase of like pulling back at the end of One Direction because it seemingly was so unmanageable, like how the degree to which they had invited fans to participate in their career at a certain point became like fans sometimes claiming like a like authorial hand in like their entire lives. So yeah, I think they did pull back after that. I think a lot of celebrities have actually. Like when I was doing the research for the book and I was thinking about like Lady Gaga's early Twitter presence, I was like, wow, I don't even remember, like I completely forgot that she was like known for that, for just like being on Twitter all the time, talking to the little monsters or whatever.
Yeah, I think there's a point where it kind of becomes unsustainable too. Like I remember I went to a Billie Eilish concert like pretty early on in her run and wrote about her in like late 2018 or something. And there was a moment where you could actually see on her Twitter account sort of when management took over. Like it used to just be like her in all lowercase, like, hey guys, just posting random stuff. And it was, and that was part of how she built like her early audience. But, there was a moment when like the tense changed and everything was properly capitalized. And it was like, Billie's new video will be coming out at 11 a.m. tomorrow. Yeah. And I think to some extent, I think it definitely is something that's evolved over time. And it's also just like the bigger you get, the more of a headache it is to deal with any of that. But yeah, there is like a visible aesthetic where you can kind of tell. I mean, you can tell that with a lot of celebrities too, when someone's tweeting for them probably, and when it seems to be genuine. So
yeah, that was like a whole subject of debate within One Direction fandom too, of course, like which tweets were secretly written by management.
Yeah, and there's a lot of, you kind of write in the book and don't shy away from the ways in which like this veers into conspiracy thinking and some, sort of just odious parts of our larger culture and effects that social media have had. But yeah, there comes a point where the speculation over, if they say something that you don't like, it's easy to say, well, they didn't really write that. That was management, or whatever else. So what, like, I'm curious of like writing about sort of the darker sides of fandom and the more fractured and combative elements, like when you're kind of writing about the Larry Stylinson stands, the Larrys versus the people that don't believe in that, and it gets pretty heated, like even within this community that once felt like such a refuge for people. Was it sort of darker than you even imagined when you started like poking around in there, or were your suspicions pretty much like upheld in digging really deep into this?
I had written about like Larry Stylinson and Babygate a couple of times before, like when they were happening. So that was part of the reason that there was a pretty substantial like faction on Tumblr that was really upset that I was writing this book. I think like
for the
oh yeah.
You can better explain it than I can actually.
Oh, it's just like, so Larry Stylinson being the like ship of Harry Styles and Louis Tomlinson, like some people believe in it fictionally and just like enjoy fantasizing about it. Other people became like really bent on like proving that they're in this secret relationship and oppressed by the entertainment industry and basically like everyone in their lives. And then Babygate was the sort of like unfortunate like iteration of that, in which like Louis Tomlinson got a girl he was dating pregnant, she had a baby, and there's to this day a lot of people who believe it's not actually his child. And you know, at one point they thought it was a doll. Now there's other explanations for who the kid is, that basically you know, the mother of the child is like a gold digger and a manipulator, et cetera, et cetera. Anyway, I had written about those things while they were happening, and I think like in a little bit more of a surface level way, like in an on the Verge, I did like an explainer, and then I wrote something for the Hairpin that was about just like women in conspiracy literature in general, and like use that as kind of a peg. But when I went back to research it for the book, I think I wasn't surprised by how dark it was, but I was pretty surprised by how like sad it was. Just like hearing people talk, or like reading people talk about their friendships ending because of Babygate, or like I think like for members of the LGBT community in One Direction fandom, it could be pretty painful, because whenever they were talking about issues of like queer visibility within pop music fandom, it could kind of get mutated into like, oh, you're just Larry's, like you're just talking about Larry. So that really sucked. And then I also spoke to a woman, a Black woman, who was talking about, there's like a infamous video of Louis Tomlinson like saying the N-word, or a British abbreviation of the N-word. And a lot of the Larrys were like really determined that like he didn't want to say that. He was forced to say that by management as part of like the new like straight jock playboy persona they're making him put on. So I think she said she felt like pretty betrayed by the fandom in that moment. So I think like I just hadn't fully considered how like actually difficult and emotional it was for people, and especially like people who were really young and got kind of caught up in it, and then later really regretted a lot of the like things that they'd said that were really misogynistic or like homophobic or just gross. And so it was just like kind of a sad disaster, really.
Yeah. It seems, again, like kind of what we're saying, there comes a point where there's a certain denial of the reality that also feels like we're seeing I think there was something sort of eerie about parts of the end of the book, because it's easy to like for people to dismiss this or think it's like not as important because it's about pop culture, but we're seeing these same sorts of patterns happen in conversations about public health, in conversations about politics, and you know, just this denial of any part of the narrative that isn't convenient to like the fantasy that you have of who Louis is, or
yeah,
you know, and to, I think that is kind of a unfortunate element of this thing that again is like started out for so many people as escapism and a way to bond with other people that were into the same stuff as them, and things do mutate over time in this way that also feels connected to this larger dynamic of how social media has changed so many ways of how we relate to each other, or don't, or shut out people that, you know, don't agree with our interpretation of things.
Yeah, I feel like the thing that really stood out to me when I went back into research Babygate was just like how much the story was kind of created by just a handful of big accounts. And I think you see that now too with a lot of the issues you were talking about. Like there's something about the way that social media is set up where there's a powerful incentive to kind of be at the center of one of these communities and like be the one creating these like alternative narratives and kind of like, you know, invite people to contribute to it with you, but ultimately you're just like kind of feeling powerful from the attention that you receive for crafting it. I feel like that was a big thing in Larry Stylinson that I hadn't known before. Like I thought the Babygate story had evolved a little bit more organically, where it was really driven by like a handful of influencers.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think you also do a really good job of tracing the pre-internet history of this too, and you know, going back to the Beatles, who are the original boy band in so many ways, and the way that, you know, I think you found some parallels in Beatles fan communities that have sort of modern echoes in what's going on in the fan communities online. So if you could maybe talk a little bit about what those discoveries were like and kind of doing that sort of research.
Yeah, I thought it was really funny. There was like I bought this like old copy of Life magazine about Beatle mania off of Poshmark, and I feel bad. I had to lie to the woman. She was like, if you buy it, you can't open it. And I was like, I won't. Like it was already like falling apart, whatever. But in it there was some coverage of this like this group of girls in California that had basically started they called it like the Beatles Saniacs organization, and it was supposed to be like, we're too obsessed with the Beatles, we are now giving ourselves an intervention, we're like abstaining from anything to do with the Beatles. And it was covered like really credulously, like these girls, they realize they've gone too far and they are scared. But the rules were totally ridiculous. They were like, don't talk about the Beatles, don't talk about Beatles like the bug, don't speak with a British English accent, like don't speak English. Like these are the rules of being in the clubs. It's obviously a joke. And I just thought it was so funny that it's been so many decades of people covering fans and just kind of like always assuming, like always taking it totally at face value. Like there's no possibility that any of it could be like a little bit tongue-in-cheek or self-aware. And then there's this kind of like mythology around fans that's really tempting, like for journalists, like during Beatlemania, there were all these news reports of people like draining swimming pools that the Beatles had been in, or like tearing up the sheets in their hotel and selling tiny pieces of them. And like maybe some of that happened. It just when I was interviewing the young woman who built the shrine, is such a dramatic way of phrasing it, put up a poster on the highway where Harry Styles had thrown up. And then there was all
the big set pieces in the book, I would say.
yeah, it's come up a lot. But when the news coverage was about like, oh, a crazed fan scooped up his vomit and sold it on eBay, she was like, I have no idea what they're talking about. And it just made me wonder, like, is this something that this whole like narrative of like fans scooping up, I don't know, like bodily fluids or like stray trash, like how often is that really happening? But yeah, it was fun to read about. I'm not a Beatles fan myself. I never really like participated in any modern day Beatles fandom, so it was like totally just like completely going in cold.
Yeah, we were also talking like before in the virtual green room about the connections that between the way we talk about sort of pop culture fan communities and sports fans, and how gender feels like a huge topic there of how we stereotypically gender sports fans versus say One Direction fans or something. And it's something as like a female sports fan that I'm always kind of thinking about. And I was saying that I had written this essay for Book Forum about Mets fandom right before reading your book, and wished that I had read it time to sort of include that whole thread of how, and you mentioned Jimmy Breslin's book about the 1962 Mets was like a touchstone for how to write about fandom for you, I think, which is pretty unexpected. And is that was that a connection you were seeing in your research? And do you sort of have thoughts and observations of the different cultural ways we talk about sports fandom versus pop musical fandom?
Yeah, I actually didn't read that book until after I was done with my book. I read it I guess this winter because I was feeling a friend of mine wanted us to like become baseball people, and I was like, maybe. But and it's like it's got a lot of like Brooklyn Dodgers like lore in it too, which is exciting and interesting to me as like a true like New York City head. I just like want to learn anything possible about New York. But yeah, I think so. When I was doing the research for my book, I was reading a lot of academic papers just to kind of get a grasp of the broader conversation, even though it's not an academic book. But it's really funny. There's a complete like total divide between sports fans research and like media fan. Like it's I'm sorry, I just hit my soda. It's like all of media fandom, like TV, books, movies, music, everything, and then like just sports separately. So I didn't really like read very much about sports fandom, and I kind of like forgot it existed. But it's like people have brought that up a bunch, like just the way that like female fans are kind of understood to be like totally hysterical and out of control of their bodies and like superstitious and paranoid. And obviously you could say all of those things about like predominantly male, or maybe not even predominantly male, but at least significantly male sports fandoms as well. It's just like I don't know. I mean, it's not that fun to be like it's misogyny, but like probably is. I don't know.
Yeah. And I think it's just having a very narrow view and kind of what gets taken seriously, even in like a leisure context of, judging someone for being a part of like a pop fan community as opposed to like being a fan of the New York Mets, which I am both of those things. So complicated. But
yeah,
I think there's like, you sort of get into this too of the way that a lot of people who feel marginalized by the mainstream culture and are everything about our society marginalizes teen girls. I mean, that is only going to get worse, I fear, in what's to come. But it does seem to, and you mentioned the queer fan base, and which is also a big part of stan culture, people that maybe don't feel represented by the mainstream depictions of media or the things that get taken seriously and are taking things into their own hands a little bit. Like, did you find it to be kind of a place of subversion in that way?
Yeah, I think I think like all fandom is a little bit subversive because it's sort of like it's like refusing to like make your time useful or to like behave with a level of like decorum that people think is appropriate for like, I guess I feel like it's kind of resistant to the idea of the daily grind. It's like indulging in a little bit more like joy or excitement than people think is mature. But yeah, in One Direction fandom, I think just because it was so tied to Tumblr maybe, and just like the expansiveness of the fandom being kind of spread out across the internet, really had a lot of different groups that were either like taking the music and kind of like twisting it and reappropriating it for their own uses, or like really deliberately organizing around like visibility within fandom, kind of like challenging the idea of who a One Direction fan is, just because there was such a powerful media narrative about the, like heterosexual, like white teenage girl who loved One Direction. So there were definitely, like, Rainbow Direction was the name of the organization for queer fans. That was like definitely the most organized and arguably the most successful, because One Direction was explicitly acknowledging them by the end of their run, even if Liam put his foot in his mouth a few times over it. And then later, like in Harry Styles' solo career, I wrote a bit about Black Harry Styles fans who were also really organized around the idea of visibility on social media, which I think is like sort of a precursor to other forms of activism that people have started noticing amongst fandom in the last couple of years. And yeah, so it's really exciting to watch. It's also just like sort of a mystery where it will go next, I think.
Yeah, I also should mention, if anyone has any questions that they want to pop in the chat too, or if you want to just say who you stand, or your favorite One Direction member, whatever. The space,
it's not Liam.
Whatever. Yeah. So you are a Niall fan.
Yeah.
And
I'm a Niall person.
I was gonna ask that, like, I think there's a bigger question in here too, but like, in writing and reporting a book like this, like, do you feel like you are bringing a certain bias to the table, or does that bias help you in this case of like being a fan of one particular, not even just Niall, but like one particular fan community, and having, I think you write really well and very entertainingly, I think, about like your own journey and sort of what was going on in your life at the time that you were falling into this community. And does that, having sort of an emotional stake in this yourself, does that help you or hurt you from, writing and seeing like the objective aspects of what is going on and what you're...
Yeah. I think it helped a lot in like in the research process, just because I could remember so much and find things that I would have never have come across just if I hadn't been a fan. It was hard, especially because the book is so, I think, like has to be like so critical of fandom at places. I was like really nervous about writing a book that was like defending my version of fandom and then like pointing at all these other types of fandom that I thought were wrong, or just like making a divide in that way. But I think like the talking to other fans kind of kept me honest in that way, because they were so forthcoming about their own experiences, or on the flip side, they were so hostile about the idea of the book that it really, like, I guess it like pushed me to accept like so this isn't going to ring true to everybody, like no matter what I do. So my goal here should be like to serve the reader as best as I can and like not be dishonest. So yeah, I think like I was definitely biased, especially you can tell that it's like a Niall and Harry stan writing the book more so than somebody who ever cared very much about Zayn or Louis or Liam. But hopefully that's not too distracting for people.
But I think it's part of the whole point of it too. Like there's an emotional stake for you as well, and I think that makes it feel like you're not looking down on these people in this community, like you are one of them yourself.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was really more of a lurker always, but
it's a good thing for a journalist to be too.
Yeah.
What was it like, sort of like, how do you go about researching a book like this? Because so much of what you're sort of writing about is ephemera of just like, you know, a weird thing that someone tweeted 5 years ago or 10 years ago. Like, how were there a lot of things that were difficult to track back down?
Yeah. I logged into my college Tumblr and went through like all of my likes and reblogs, which was super helpful because I could like use the Wayback Machine to find blogs that weren't there anymore. And then I talk about in the book the fact that like the One Direction fandom, thankfully, like part of that fandom practice was like self historicizing or like amateur archival work. So there are like people on Tumblr who have been One Direction fans for a really long time who like use their blogs just to kind of like keep a running list of famous fandom memes, or you can ask them to find you something and they'll find it. And that was super helpful. Well, one of the Niall Horan ear fiction came from Bad 1D Imagines, which was originally a Tumblr just curating those weird stories, but eventually just like by merit of being around for so long, the woman who ran that account just became kind of the like librarian of the fandom, and her blog was such a good resource. So it was a lot of reconstituting things from the Wayback Machine, or like finding people who remembered things and could like confirm to me that I hadn't made them up in my head. And my little sister also helped too, because she was really in it. She makes fun of me for being a fake fan because I don't remember as much stuff as she does.
We have a good question in the chat here that I want to go back
Okay.
to. So it's thinking back to the point we were making about Zelensky. Miles is asking, what is your opinion on stan-themed posts about serious topics that are bathed in irony? For example, fan cam edits about him versus people unironically talking about standing him. I think that's a good thing to bring in, the idea of irony, and where that it's a very fine line on the internet often when someone is being serious versus ironic. And in that case in particular, anyway.
Yeah. I feel like this happened too around like when we were waiting for the 2020 election results. There were people making fan cams of the electoral map, like of like the state of Georgia, and then like just like pulse and have the confetti and like all of these fan cam characteristics. I think like in some of those instances, it's not so much an actual expression of standing as it is like these are just kind of the tools and materials of fandom that we like would package any kind of reaction or statement in. So like people who made a fan cam of an electoral map, or like people who are like parodying the whole like marvelization of Zelensky, are obviously like having fun with form and are not like mindlessly interpreting everything as a fan battle. But I don't know, I think it does like leach in a little bit, even if you are being ironic. I still find it hard sometimes to resist the impulse to be like moved by a politician who gets like a gifable like zinger across or whatever. Like it's really tempting like to like, I don't know, be able to place these kind of comforting, familiar pop culture narratives onto events that are really complex and scary.
Yeah, because I think the line is blurring in so many ways too. And we're getting, part of being on social media is you're getting everything in the same feed pretty much. So you're getting, you know, news about the new Harry Styles single in the same feed where you're getting updates about what's going on in Ukraine. And like it does that impulse, the sort of like fanification of politicians and global figures, like it feels related to that like decontextualizing thing that happens on the internet for sure.
Yeah, I think that's also part of the reason that people use that term like platform so often. Like you'd understand like politicians as having a platform, but now like anybody with a certain number of social media followers has like a platform that they should be like using responsibly or for like the public good. And that's like part of why people expect celebrities now to have all kinds of political takes, because it's just like, you have this platform, anyone who exists in the rung of platform like needs to be on our side.
Yeah. Where you kind of mentioned earlier, observing changes over time. And I think internet fan cultures are something that have now been going on long enough that there are these micro trends that come and go. Are you noticing anything new happening that sort of like predicts where all of this is going, or what has been your more recent observations of maybe some shifts that are happening there?
I think like just of the younger generation of adult internet users in general, I feel like I've noticed them being more interested in like privacy or seclusion on the internet. And I wonder if people are sort of looking at Stan Twitter and starting to think like that's not exactly what I see myself doing in order to express that I really love something, and more spending time like back on Tumblr or like on Discord. I know like Ethel Kane's fans have a pretty active Discord, and that fandom like freaks me out a little bit, but but like that makes sense to me, that if you were tired of kind of like being marketed to or like having a narrative placed on you, you would just sort of retreat into a more insular space.
Yeah. And what is kind of going off that, what is the current status of the One Direction fan community? Because they're one dead, as you talk about at the end of the book. They've not been a band for how many years now?
I know, almost 7.
Wow. But there's still this sort of ghostly fan community almost. Like, how active are things like at the moment, now that this is a community, went from a community of like actively supporting a band and trying to, run their singles up the charts and things like that, to almost a nostalgic thing for a band that hasn't existed for almost 7 years?
Yeah, there's people on Tumblr that still identify like whether they're fans of, they'll differentiate if they're fans of the original 5 members of One Direction or just the 4. But I feel like mostly people have moved on to kind of like picking allegiances with the solo careers, I guess. Like like people do grow up, and like fandom isn't something that level of fandom isn't something you're probably going to indulge in like every day for the rest of your life, even if you still have like fond memories of it and you still like dip your toes in it here and there. I think like it was very much like a scene in a like time and place. Like I actually when I was like pitching this book, I was like, I think it's like the Meet Me in the Bathroom, the book about like lower Manhattan like rock music in the early aughts. I was like, I think it's like that, except for it's just like the internet. Like it's a scene that's like limited in time and space, just like in a different physical way.
Yeah, and there's something elegiac about it in that sense too. Like you're sort of documenting something that in some ways we're moving on to whatever the next thing is now, but there's something valuable about really telling the story and getting it there in an engaging way. If we have any more questions, we have about 5 minutes left, so we're going to wrap up soon, but wanted to make sure we got to everybody and their burning questions. What was the most, so this is the first book that you've written.
Yeah.
With many more. What was the most surprising thing about writing this book for you?
I guess it was really weird to just like be in this Microsoft Word document for like 2 years and know that I was writing it for a public audience, but not actually think about people reading it. Like when you're writing for the internet every day, the audience reaction or whatever is just so front of mind because it's going to happen in 10 hours or whatever, like whenever you put the post up. So it was really like private and personal. And I feel like there were things like once I had turned in the draft that I was like, oh, I kind of can't believe I said that or like that I talked about that. And I had to like take some identifying details about people out because I was like, oh, I like literally totally forgot that people are going to be reading this. I thought I was just like doing something freaky in my house.
In the process.
Yeah.
Are you still a One Direction fan after all of this time?
Yeah, totally. I love them. I mean, I root for them, especially Niall and Harry in their solo careers, but I think this is what I got roasted for saying on the podcast. I was just like, none of them are ever going to be as good as One Direction was. It was such a like, it was just like a bolt of lightning. It was just like, I don't know. It was so exciting. It was so cool and funny. And like, it's fine that it's over, but it was better than what's going to happen next.
Yeah, part of that, like you said, is the creative energy of the fan community. It's not just about the music they were putting out or anything. And I think you do such a good job of capturing that excitement and absurdity and humor and intrigue and everything in this book. So yeah, thank you for writing it.
Well, thanks. Thank you for reading it. I've been reading like everything you've written for the last 5 years at least, so this is really exciting.
Well, thank you guys all for coming virtually, and we're gonna wrap up now, but please buy Kaitlyn's book if you have not already. And yeah, thanks so much for tuning in. There's a link in the chat.
Yeah, well, thank you both so much for being here. We really appreciate it. Such a fascinating conversation and topic. It was a pleasure to host you both, Kaitlyn Tiffany and Lindsay Zoladz, and to welcome all of you. And like Lindsay said, please consider purchasing a copy of Everything I Need I Get From You by visiting us at pels.com. And while you're there, please be sure to check out our lineup of other upcoming virtual events. You can also find recordings of past virtual events on our YouTube page. And we look forward to seeing you at another one of our events again soon. Kaitlyn, Lindsay, thanks again for being here, and have a great night, everyone.
Thanks. See ya.